Hello, and welcome to this session entitled Shift Left, Building Security into the Application Development Lifecycle. My name is Rob Borrego, and I'm Chief Security Strategist with Micro Focus. Let's jump right in. First, breaking news. Where did security go? And when we talk about that, that's going to be the theme of today in relation to application security. We all know about different things relative to the security areas of coverage for infrastructure, for data, right? Kind of the perimeter side of things. But what about the applications themselves, and how are we properly enabling security at the application tier? Let's start though top level and take into consideration the conversations that are happening these days at the board level, right? The C level. The C-suite and board of directors are all wanting to understand how it is that cyber is impacting their business. And typically that's looked at in three different realms. Number one, is cyber somehow positively impacting the organization in a means that allows them to drive and increase revenue? Number two, is there an opportunity where there is cost savings taking place, or the savings relational to what if we get breached and the costs associated to negative brand recognition, negative revenue impact, costs associated to litigation? So all of those elements come into that second realm. And the third is all around risk. And so how is it that cyber is driving at attainment of risk and to the specific appetite that the organization has and tolerance around cyber risk specifically, or technology risk? So all of those elements boil down to what you're seeing here, which is how do we deal with risk from the business side and associate the cyber aspect of that? How do we look at the opportunities we have in front of us where we can actually drive incremental revenue streams? And of course, how do we look at different opportunities that we can actually save the organization money? So it's all those different elements that we have to take into consideration, and whatever the cyber-oriented topic is we're discussing, how does it translate into what the business is looking to understand? When you look at the kind of elements of cyber risk programs in general are pretty complicated. There's a lot going on, but we can really focus in on these four key areas. It'll give you a good rounding as it relates to putting in place a cyber risk program that gives a good holistic coverage model for your organization. And there's four elements, as I mentioned. The first one is around getting a handle and understanding of what are the key and critical data elements of the business you're in. Once you've gone through the process of identifying what those data elements are, and that's an interview process typically, then you have to understand where that resides throughout all the different systems you have out there, whether it's structured or unstructured data. And once you've done that and properly classified it, now you can apply the protections here on top of that data. And it means that allows you to protect it effectively, that if or when it gets out into the wrong hands, there's no means of being able to actually monetize that information because it's not the real set of information as you would expect it to be. So that's the first aspect of a cyber risk program. The second, which is what we're going to focus our attention on today, is all around how we're securing our applications. So I'm going to hold off on that for a second. The third is around ensuring that the right people and or things have the right access to the right data, the right applications, and at the right times. So basically having a complete visibility and management control mechanisms on top of how you gauge and govern specific identities, again, whether they're people or things at this point, and ensuring that everything is appropriate in the means of access controls and overview of who they are and what they're trying to do within the environment. And then the final element of the risk program centers itself much more around kind of that security operational capability. And typically when we look there, it's a lot as it relates to organizations building out kind of the logical rules that are looking for specific things to occur. And when and if they do, the security analysts within the SOC will know how to triage those, will know how to actually mitigate the situation, remediate the situation even. So they basically are saying kind of, here's what I'm looking for, and when it happens, this is what I should do. Well, that's great. But the other half of the equation is, what about the stuff I have no idea is even going on? Right. So it's the abnormalities or the anomalies, and being able to actually round out and pick up on what those things are that are impactful threats to the business, and have visibility that they actually are occurring. They are dwelled within the environment. You found them, and now you go through the cycle of being able to deal with the mitigation tactics to get them out of the environment and basically minimize the time that they're sitting in there and causing even more pain to the business. So again, look at it from that top level cyber risk kind of lens. Simplify it into 4 areas of focus as you see here, and that helps you really kind of start building out the foundation of an overarching program. So again, the theme of today is all around shifting left and as it relates to application security. So first, well, why? Why application security? Well, let's talk about some of those reasons why. The first is, we look at software in general, development of software. It's extremely complex, right? It's no longer the days of kind of a waterfall methodology, not even to the agile at this point. We're in complete DevOps, right? So organizations typically are thinking about, it's releases on the fly, right? In some organizations, you think about, where they basically have been able to grow up this way, like a Netflix, for example, it's code changes on the fly in the day, within the hours, right? Within the seconds in some cases. It's just crazy to think about. Well, it's even crazier to think about what that means from a security perspective. And again, we're going to delve into that. But over 40% of organizations are releasing once or more per week at this point in time. And 80% of applications, the code of the applications themselves, they're coming from open source libraries. So again, it's kind of this, it's great to be able to collaborate, repurpose, reuse what's out there completely for that. That's wonderful. But you have to put the security lens on top of what are those open source libraries that are coming into play, and also have the visibility, understanding of what vulnerabilities they actually may have within them that they're introducing into the environment. I love to talk about this specific piece of factual information that Homeland Security came out with, because it really drives home the point of how important application security is. So when you look at the security breaches that are occurring and have been occurring for the past several years now, really the core kind of entry point at this stage to get to is at the application layer. And so what we're seeing here as Homeland Security is depicting is that 90%, right, let me repeat that, 90% of security incidents are coming through exploits within code defect, right? And typically, of course, that is associated to the vulnerabilities within the code sets themselves. So this is a piece of critical information, something that in your own security program, which we're going to talk more about in a bit here, you want to take and drive home as powerful reasoning as to the importance, the criticality of putting an application security program in place. So some additional kind of informational tidbits that you wanted to take into account. Almost 80% of web applications have at least one critical or high severity issue in them. I mean, just they're rifled with vulnerabilities out there. Never mind then when we shift gears and look at mobile applications, right? So people are so conveniently with the end consumer going in and, oh, let me download that new app. I'm not paying attention to what the specifics are of where it's coming from, what it is, and I just want it. I put it on. And oh, and by the way, I'm almost at 90% of finding out that these applications that I'm putting on my mobile devices are actually driving at vulnerabilities back into those applications. And then overarching applications in general, over 60% have critical or high vulnerabilities. And specifically, by the way, that are not covered by the OWASP top 10. So let's think about the developer side of this equation, right? And the development side is typically, it's not that they're against security, it's just that then when they hear security is going to get involved, basically it slows them down. Right? And that's unfortunately just kind of the way things have been. And so, again, it's not that they don't want to be developing secure code, by no means, but it's just that theme of, okay, here comes security, right? We've got this check coming through, and it's just going to slow me down now, right? And they've got this deadline to meet. So let's look at some kind of elements of that, right? So the first is security typically in many organizations still to this day, unfortunately, are not pulled in the early stages of whatever that new project or initiative is. And so when getting pulled in at the tail end, right, the issues then are basically going to increase cost. And the reason why I say increase cost is because typically it's very late to the point where you may have findings, but they're going to still release the code. And then when it's in the wild, and now there's some sort of issue found, some vulnerability that's actually exploited, now what? Now it's back to the well, right? Now we got to go back. We got to fix this. We got to identify the specifics of the issues, cost. Oh, and by the way, what did that lead to? Did it lead to a data breach, right? Do we have brand issues now? Did we just negatively impact our shares in the marketplace? I mean, so you got to think about all this behind the scenes, and those are key driving points as to the importance of why security needs to be at the front end, needs to be at the table, needs to be aware, involved, not as slowing things down, as involved in the conversation and looking for ways to make it as seamless as possible to work with the development teams so that they can continue to fluidly move through getting the code out into production. The second aspect is developers look at, again, as I mentioned even earlier, security aspects as being slowing things down. So the security scans are going to take time that is going to then slow me down, not just in waiting for the results, but then getting the results and now having to go work through, understand what they actually interpret to, and how I effectively go and resolve those issues. And then the third element of it is kind of that auditing aspect, right? So the auditors are knocking at the door looking for specific issues, and developers look at that as, okay, well, geez, here we go, right? They're just basically going to, again, be another hurdle in front of me, and I'm just having to answer these questions, but I'm just getting slowed down again. All right, so it's looking at those kind of elements as key kind of roadblocks, unfortunately, that have been put up and in front of developers really kind of just easily working and saying, yeah, security just kind of gets baked in. We're all for it, right? We got to bridge that. So let's look at things as it relates to the attacker side of the equation, right? The attackers, and I mentioned this earlier, right? The Homeland Security statistic is key to drive this point home. The attackers are moving away from going at the perimeter, right? The kind of infrastructure firewall, let me get through and in, and targeting specifically the application tier, right? And when they look at that, it's kind of this treasure trove because still, as I said, many organizations are either in the infancy of their maturity program or not even really doing too much other than kind of checking a box to get by, right? So it's a pretty large attack surface. It's also because of the volume of applications that are out there, the speed they're getting out, as we were talking about, without security checks actually occurring. So it's kind of, again, a treasure trove that the attackers are sitting there going after all day long. And we talked about also, kind of the shift organizationally from, again, whether it's waterfall to agile and now at DevOps, but it's how things have evolved to this point of really many organizations doing something, if not completely, following a DevOps program approach. So again, the speed, the frequency, all that comes into play, of course. And when you look at kind of the typical kind of infinity loop as depicted for DevOps, you don't see security specifically called out. And honestly, that's okay, because what we want is security to just be inherently baked in. And so I'm not sitting here saying that, hey, listen, security should be somewhere within it. No, what? It's okay. Security actually should just be inherently understood and encompassed within the term of DevOps. A lot of that is a cultural shift, right? A lot of education goes on, but it's the ground basis of where I've seen extremely effective application security programs work. The other aspect of this to call out is that think about how many developers there are in an organization in relation to someone that would be actually focused on application security. And so kind of a key statistics that we've seen out there is 80 developers to 1 application security champion. So again, overwhelming. So DevOps, and you hear the term DevSecOps. So we kind of call it out here and saying, it's important to include right, security in DevOps. Again, I'm a major proponent of saying DevOps and not saying DevSecOps because I inherently just want it to be understood and known. And if you think of it, it's what do they do today in the QA environment? They're testing for defects. Security vulnerabilities should be just deemed as a defect category, right? And so when you look at this, there's three areas that we're calling out. And kind of you hear the acronym IAA. So integration, automation, and agility. When it comes to integration, it's all about making the kind of developer's world as seamless as possible with the tooling that supports application security testing and baking it in. And so it's embedding those tool sets within their IDEs, allowing it to call out and say, hey, by the way, you just unfortunately inserted this line of code that is actually including a SQL injection or cross-site script, whatever vulnerability, but not just telling them that, but also, by the way, this is how you can go about and actually fix the issue. So the integration is extremely important. The automation, again, is to drive it home, to track them as security defects as part of the SDLC. So again, not calling it out as security vulnerabilities per se. The verbiage, right, terminology that we're communicating back to the dev teams is critically important. We got to talk in their world, their nomenclature, right? So QA, what is it? It's a defect. The defect in this case is under the category of security. Let's talk about it as code defects, right? And then the agility side of it. So quickly provide the insight as it associates to the findings. Right? What are the results of the scans? And don't just, again, as I said previously, give them here's the problem. It's here's the problem, and by the way, this is the recommended solution. So they're looking at it and they go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Boom, make the switch, make the change, fix the code, move on. As opposed to sitting there, now I got to research, figure out what exactly was wrong there, and now what exactly I need to do to fix that problem. Right? So seamless, make it easy for them. We've seen many different application security programs kind of get started by regulatory compliance drivers. So I view that as a good opportunity that you want to take advantage of. But I've been involved in cybersecurity for the last 20 years. So I've always looked at compliance as a great opportunity for anything I'm trying to accomplish in my cybersecurity program. Why? Because as I'm going through and achieving what the compliance regulation is asking and requiring of me from my organization, I'm looking at, well, how do I make my security program better and leverage the funding I'm getting from the compliance side to do so. And when I make my security program better in specific areas, inherently, I'm covering off my needs from the compliance mandates. So from an AppSec perspective, again, starting off from a driver of compliance, we've seen NYDFS as an example, one recently over the past couple of years pop up, GDPR, different privacy regulations, great. Take advantage of those things. Take advantage of those things to be able to, again, drive your cybersecurity program and your AppSec program forward while still being able to go through and support the specific requirements of compliance. But just understand that you don't stop there, right? That's the kind of a more of a checkbox approach mentality, and you definitely don't want to stop there. Let's talk about, again, the development side and how the security aspects, of what they're doing are critically important. So it's kind of interesting to take a look at some of these responses. But when you look at the developer community as the audience of the survey that was conducted here, what's interesting is so over 70% of the developers said that they did not believe that there was any sort of AppSec program in place within the organization. That may be the case. More likely than not, it's not. There may be just a very small kind of spot within the organization, maybe underneath the vulnerability management program, that there's probably something going on. Over 50% of developers aren't even making the changes or the updates to known vulnerable components. So think about that. They know there's a vulnerability in their code set, in that code base that they're publishing, and they're not taking the steps to resolve that. It's not that they don't want to. It's the timelines to meet to get the actual code completed over for testing and out the door from a traditional development perspective. So again, it's a lot of cultural change that needs to take place, but moving it to more of this programmatic based approach, which we'll get into in a second, is the way to really help drive and improve, again, success of many different AppSec programs we've been involved with. And close to 50% of the developers who, again, lack the time to spend on security issues that they believe are important. So again, speed, right? Let's get this code out the door. And therefore, I just don't have time to go resolve that issue, which I, by the way, know exists. So the seamlessness of application security, right? Baking it in. So when you look at kind of the kind of areas in this cycle, the first is around that continuous kind of feedback, right? So secure development in a means that allows them to understand what's happening and what they should do when something is identified as a defect. Again, I'm using that word specifically, defect. Then the testing aspect of it, again, enablement of the tools just being baked in. So it's baked into the QA environments. That's one thing, but bake it into the IDE. Bake it in so that as they're coding, they're being flagged and told, hey, by the way, here's an issue and here's how you go about resolving that. The third piece that we're seeing is also around runtime protection. So you see this happening is organizationally, again, think about the speed of, applications being developed and deployed. Think about the developers ratio 80-1 versus security people, right, that are tied to AppSec. So the runtime protection piece allows them to say, okay, well, I want to bake them into my traditional AppSec program for coverage within, static and dynamic analysis, but I kind of can't get to it because I got a backlog. Well, I can actually just put, runtime protection on that specific code at the app tier and kind of come back to it afterwards. So at least I have some form of coverage occurring. And so that's another approach that we've seen out there. And then again, this continuous monitoring aspect of it. So it's not just this point in time, it's been approved, it's now released, and we move on to the next thing. No, these applications need to be continuously tested. Changes are being made. Sometimes they're not going through the normal change process approvals. So we need to be on top of what's happening out there. And again, it needs to be driven at not just the speed, but even more critically important, the accuracy, right? The accuracy of the findings, the results that are out there, and avoiding just that creation of noise, right? Because that'll completely blow up the program. And the adoption of the dev teams in their desire to tie in and work with the security teams going forward. I mentioned some of this earlier, kind of that, automation aspect. And so, we've seen up to 25% savings in time from the development side of the house. And we've also seen, again, that reduction in false positives be extremely critical, back to the theme of accuracy. So 95% reduction. So a lot of these aspects are critically important to ensuring that you are going to work to provide inherent value to the development teams, that they, again, will be just saying security is just part of what I'm doing when I'm coding anyways, and identifying issues and being able to resolve those issues on the fly, as I would do for any other sort of code defect. So now let's talk about the establishing aspects of an AppSec program. And let's just kind of talk first about kind of where things fit in from an application security point of view relative to kind of the traditional CI/CD pipeline. So on the first side of things, you kind of have, the development aspect I was talking about before, the IDEs, tying it in, baking it in, having the tooling right there within their IDEs to point out issues that are occurring. And then streamlining things back into the kind of aspects of testing and pushing it back out from staging to production. And the elements down at the bottom, talk about some different things that, we're doing around whether it's open source library analysis and understanding exactly what's being used, and more importantly, where there may be vulnerabilities within those particular open source libraries. And we do that through using Sonatype's software composition analysis. We do that baking it in through also our Fortify demand service. And then you have, of course, the SAST and DAST, so the static and dynamic analysis aspects of things. And again, we have our Fortify static code analyzer there, and then our Fortify web inspect, and then over to the right, RASP, right? So real-time application software protection. And so that's Application Defender from Fortify. And all of these things, as you can see, are also baked into our Fortify demand service. So whether it's something that you're looking to do on-prem, if you want to do it through a service with us, if you want to do it hybrid, which many organizations are also doing now, it's nice complete coverage. And so the integration of all of that capability is also critically important to bake into the tooling, right? Again, making it as seamless as possible for the developers to work within the tools that they're used to working and having the application security components of it just tied in as we've been talking about. So you can see down here references to different IDEs, specific source control, right? Open source, build. So all of these different areas is just examples of our integration ecosystem available. And again, the only way we have security really focused in the DevOps, the CI/CD aspects of the world we live in is by just having security baked in. So that's the point of what you're seeing here, whether it's the static, whether it's the dynamic analysis happening, whether it's tying it into real-time application self-protection, it's just baking it into it. When you look at the specific goals and benefits, though, driven out of an application security program, you kind of boil it down to three areas to measure success against. Number one, you have to ensure that you're specifically tying in your security priorities as it aligns to what the business priorities and desired outcomes are. If you're not doing that and you're only putting that lens of security on what you're trying to achieve, you're losing track. You're probably going to start off okay, but then you're going to quickly fade off. So again, it has to be aligned to what the business goals are. Second, you have to, I shouldn't say you have to, but you should have a way of being able to say, this is what we look like today. This is where we want to go. These are the steps we're going to take over this time period, and make those things achievable. So don't go overboard on what you're saying. Hey, here's where we are as our current state. Here's the target state. And we're going to be able to achieve these things in this period of time, which is something you can't do. Just don't. You got to basically do bite-sized chunks. You need to do things that are easy to be able to achieve, show the quick wins, get more buy-in from people, buy-in for funding to continue to progress the program forward, and leverage a maturity model to do so. And I'll give you kind of an example of that. But there's, BSIM and OpenSIM out there that you can always tie back into, of course, as well. And then the third element is what we've been really honing on here is that work with the development team. Work with them in a means of, again, leveraging the tool sets, the processes that they're used to, the terminology that they're used to, and bake yourself into that ecosystem of their world. Right? Don't come in and snap out and say, here's security, we're over here as an island, and we're going to come bug the hell out of you. No. Bake it in. Get part of the team. It's a cultural change. It's critically important, though, to be able to have a successful program. So an example, and this is kind of a different depiction, of a maturity model. So you could come in and say, hey, today our current state is maybe in kind of the second level around policy compliance. So you could say, that I have coverage in the first aspect of we're doing some testing from a dynamic and static perspective, and we have coverage typically focused on more of, identifying risks associated and attribute to specific regulatory compliance mandates that we have to abide by for the particular business or line of business we're in. But again, as I was saying, if we're in kind of that level two, well, we're probably at a point where we're doing some things from a customized based report perspective, being able to do some prioritization of what we're finding out there for the defects, the security defects, and other things like building out some specific kind of entry-level metrics that we're able to start, again, showing progress against. But ultimately, you want to continue to evolve, right? So again, you can say, hey, maybe within the first year of our program, realistically, we're going to be doing kind of that first phase risk identification. As we start shifting into maybe the 18-month mark, we're going to have the policy compliance, and then we're out and continue to evolve. Well, it's rather rare that I've seen it to the point of all the way over to the right where you have adaptive protection. But again, I have, and where I've seen that is a financial services organization that just did a tremendous job, most importantly in getting the board and the executive level buy-in to an AppSec program. And it didn't happen just, of course, overnight. It was 3 years into their program where they finally were able to, again, continue to show quick wins, but here's ultimately where they wanted to go. And kind of the holy grail for them was they were able to get buy-in and board approval for the business line owners, and they had 7 different lines of business. The business line owners, part of their compensation, of course, was bonus-based. So part of that bonus was attributed back to ensuring that their application security coverage for the applications aligned to their specific business, right, the business line in that organization, were in the green, or basically in the specific scoring mechanisms that had in place. The other great thing about that is not only is it hitting them in the pocket, so it's making sure that they're focused on this, but it's also something that was extremely visible to the executive tier, to business line owners, and to the board as a visual representation through dashboarding. And so it became more of a competitive focus as well, right? So it's great, right? It had monetary impact, but it also had kind of this nice competitive flair because it was extremely visible to everyone. So again, that's kind of an off the charts example, but just a tremendous mature program that I've seen and put in place. So this is to give you guys some specific examples of good metrics to at least start with. So let's walk through some different examples here. So you could take a look at, a percentage of the security defects that we're identifying per sprint or release. We could take a look at some of the specific security defects that have been kind of over time, right? So how are we transitioning? Are we going up or down, staying flat quarter to quarter? The next one, vulnerability density, it's an interesting one. You have to be careful with it. So it's the security defects based on lines of code. And why I say you have to be careful with it is because though it's a very good metric, you just have to kind of play a little politics with it, because it at times basically it's almost like it's calling out a specific set of developers. So again, it doesn't go back, they're not trying to put bad code out there by any means. And so you just got to be careful with this. The point of this is basically that it allows you to be able to have visibility into which of the developers just need a little bit more education, right? So it just something needs to be kind of negotiated internally, that it's not a quote unquote bad thing per se. It's really more of a, hey, let's ensure that we're doing things the right way for the team, and we're getting everybody to the level that, is really required. And it's a good thing for them individually. So other examples, average time to fix the security defects by the defect type, and average time to fix the security defects based on the size of the app and the complexity of the app. So again, we've seen these as some examples of good solid AppSec metrics to be used out there. And then, I really wanted to also call out here the specifics of just some top level best practices. We've been talking about these different things kind of along the way here, but it really goes into this whole theme of shifting left, and it truly is just baked in. So that's the point of the DNA, right? It just needs to be baked in, and it baked into DevOps. So again, I'm one of these folks that doesn't like to use the term DevSecOps purposely, because I want to be able to say it's just part of DevOps. But just look at some things here, right? So security needs to be part of the value stream. So again, it's all about that inherent tie-in, make it easy, drive the value out of it, right? Look at it as being able to go through bite-sized chunks, as I mentioned before, right? So small consumable steps. Why? Because if you try to bite off more than you can chew, you're going to fail with the program. And so if you can do it in small increments that are achievable, then what does it do? Go a couple bullets down, early visible wins. And early visible wins are extremely important. If you're not showing positive progression in your current state to target state, then your program will not receive the additional funding it needs to progress forward and achieve the goals that you outlined to get it off the ground. So again, make them achievable. And then other things, again, just don't make the security policy too tight coming out of the gates. Have the opportunity to get the buy-in, and then start kind of, ratcheting it up a bit as it's put in place, and overall as the entire kind of process matures as well. So again, just some different things to take into account and leverage there. So let's talk about SAST plus DAST, right? And why the Fortify solutions make sense. So the Fortify portfolio, again, is completely centered and focused on application security, both static, dynamic testing is encompassed in there. And so let's look at some of the specifics here on the left-hand side. So unified taxonomy, extremely important, right? So you need to be able to tie it back in and tie it in from a complete view of the vulnerabilities across the entire SDLC. The drive here now goes into the consistent remediation aspect. So it's not just, here's kind of what's happening out there, here's what we identified, and that's it. No, it's being able to go through and say, okay, here's what's been identified, here's the specific reasoning behind that, and by the way, here's how you go about remediating that. So again, why? Because it's time savers, right? So the developers get it back in their hands. Don't just tell them there's a problem, give them the path to resolving the problem. Prioritize it. The prioritization is tied back into taxonomy, but it's also tied back into the very first goal of the program, which is align it to business priorities, business goals. So your view of software defects of the security category should be prioritized based on, again, what the impact is to the business. That way, they're being worked on effectively by priority. And then again, I'm just going to kind of close it out at the bottom here with the feedback loop. So this is a continuous process, right? We talked about it before. DevOps is a continuous process. Application security is just tied back into it. And then the accuracy and depth of coverage with Fortify. So one thing to understand that kind of gets lost at times is the power of Fortify behind the scenes is driven by our software security research group, which by far is the top software security research group in the industry. The accuracy of the scans. So it's not just about the speed, right? Speed means nothing when the results have tons of false positives. What am I doing? I'm just running around wasting time. So what's most important is, yes, speed to keep up with DevOps, but the accuracy of the scans is critically important. I don't want these vulnerabilities to be out there that then our organization could be exploited through the app tier to get to the data set, right? That's how we started this whole conversation. So tie it back into critical importance is accuracy. And as you can see, 100% accuracy of the scans from Fortify as benchmarked by OWASP. So not us, but by OWASP. And then over on the right, our depth of coverage, right? So we've been around for many, many years. We've been a market leader for many, many years. We have over 1,000 vulnerability categories. We have close to 30 now programming languages supported, continuing to evolve that. And then over 1 million APIs covered. And that's another strong area of focus at this point in time is the API, the application security focus on APIs. So as you can see, it's a completely rounded out, holistic solution. Take a step back though. What's most important is building the program out. Whether you're just starting out, whether you're looking to say, I need to get kind of through the wall and blow this thing open and create the path to success to do things I truly am trying to accomplish and evolve this program, right? It's important to understand the program is number one. Lay that out, get it in place. And then technology to support you on that is where we can also support how to achieve the specific actions you have, the goals and objectives, and to support you in defining those metrics that are actually going to drive a successful, mature application security program. So with that, I thank you for your time and hope you've enjoyed the session and taken some different learnings away from it. Thank you.